And here's another one of our raps, but this time with a difference. I didn't get to go to the Lofoten Islands, Lesley. Did I miss anything?
You did, and I'm sorry you didn't go. This was a kind of proper press trip organised by Visit Norway, and it was astonishing. I mean, if you speak to Norwegians about Lofoten, people go all kind of dreamy. It's a bit the same way as they do often with Skye and the Western Isles in Scotland. It's that kind of otherworldly sort of place that everyone kind of means to go, but it takes quite a long time to get there. It's not the very northernmost part of Norway, but it's in the Arctic, made famous by Joanna Lumley and that programme where she saw the Northern Lights, which she mostly did on Lofoten. But they seem to be kind of very dreamlike islands, and they have incredible wealth of animals there for spotting in the winter.
And a lot of people on the blog have already commented about some photos that you posted about sea eagles, because you went on a safari or something.
Yes, well, it started off just a pretty ordinary trip from the capital, a very bustling little capital called Svolvær of the Lofoten Islands. There's about 20,000 people that live on those sprinkling of islands, a sort of hard ridge of mountain that sticks out west into the North Sea. So we set off, little wooden boat, usual kind of thing, I suppose, going into extraordinary fjord scenery. We were heading for Trollfjorden, which has very, very steep sides, pretty vertical sides, and a tiny little kind of set of second homes at the end. So that was great. En route, pointed out sea eagles sitting on the cliffs, and that's as far as we thought, that's as close as we thought we'd get. On the way back, I don't quite register what started to happen, but there was a very piercing whistle, and at that we began to see big shapes appearing in the sky above us, much bigger than the gulls and so on around. And then with more whistles, the birds started to descend one by one, and we noticed that one of the members of staff was also throwing out bits of fish. And basically, like almost kind of trained animals, the sea eagles just began to kind of swoop down and literally just picking the things out of the sea just as they'd been thrown in. It turned out, I mean, we were all absolutely gobsmacked, and you can see some of the pictures. Actually, there's one in particular where this happened 5 or 6 times, and one eagle came so close. I mean, really, it was almost brushing our faces. And some of the close-ups I took, people have said, how did you manage to refocus so quickly? And like, I didn't, we didn't. That's the picture you get of an eagle as you're falling backwards onto your back in sheer astonishment at it passing in front of your face. And those are fish's eyes that are protruding at some, pressure. So this was all done by a young woman called Siv, who is the eagle whistler. And she'd been out with her father, who's a fisherman, when she was young, noticed that the mother eagles did this to signal to their chicks it was safe to come down and fish. And she just mimicked the eagle's cry. And that's basically how the whole thing works. So between her doing the whistling and another Icelandic lassie who chucks out the fish, they've got it taped.
And tell us about whales.
Whales? Well, whales are pretty well easy to spot all year round in a place called Andenes, which is in the Vesterålen Islands, and they are to the north of Lofoten. Now, this all begins to sound a bit complicated, but to me, it's a bit like Orkney and Shetland. So Vesterålen is kind of the Shetland to Lofoten's Orkney. There are 30,000 people in Vesterålen. It's a much more fishing place. And the reason really is that the continental shelf is closest to the Norwegian mainland, just near Andenes. So the deep, deep sea brings up all sorts of nutrients that fish like, and therefore the whales like. So there's a whole array of different types of whale there, just an hour from Andenes all year round. So we went off on this whale safari, and again, you wear these padded not safari jackets, absolutely not, survival suits. And sometimes you do sort of think you're wearing them and it's not very clear why it's needed, like the eagle safari, for example. But it's this great thing that once you're padded and warm, you're so much more up for being outdoors for maybe 6 hours at a time. And you can come in at the end of the day quite staggered that you've actually been outside in the winter in -8. And it's not been a problem. But anyway, the whale safari, we were bouncing along on the rib towards the area, Blike Canyon, which is the biggest, deepest trench that you can reliably see whales on. That day we didn't think we saw whales, and then when we got back and people were looking at their photographs, they noticed that one of the islands beside the boat as they were bopping along had a very pronounced tail. So it was a whale after all. But we didn't do the full tour. The operators are so confident you'll see a whale all year round that they offer you your money back if you don't.
Well, that's
Yeah, so you can't say fairer than that.
Yeah. So, and what about the Sami?
Well, the area is, there's the Sami are the native, well, they're all native people, arguably, of Norway, but these are kind of, they're part of an ethnic group that probably link up with the Inuit in Canada and further across into Russia with other peoples like the Nenets. And they've been traditional reindeer herder, and that's what they do still. We met just the most amazing people. If you see the photographs of this couple, Leila, Inga, the Ingas they are, and they're still reindeer herders. You can pay to be shown around and shown how they work with reindeer, and then how they have lavu, these wooden tents that have been their homes. Now this woman, I never saw this woman for the 4 hours we were there with anything but the broadest smile. This woman loves life. They love being outdoors. And their whole thing is about effectively kind of part accompanying the reindeer. It's a strange one actually, because you'd think deer are wild, they are here for us, and yet they're very worried at the moment because they notice climate change destabilising the snow, and they've lost half their herd recently in avalanches. And you kind of think again, reindeer must have to cope with that, but they feel they have to go with them, and they kind of go everywhere the reindeer go and migrate for pasture. They basically migrate with them. And in history, they've seen the whole of the Arctic North as their area of Sami land, which of course causes all sorts of problems for national governments who absolutely don't think it's a place you can just stroll across if you feel like it. They were persecuted, they're not now. And their culture is fascinating. They have all sorts of stuff they can explain to you about the precedence of yourself as a visitor according to where in the lavu tent you're able to sit. And some of the places we stayed, the hotels are amazing because they're all so individual. One place we stayed, they actually served you dinner in a lavu, and the best meal I think we had of the lot was a guy called Nigel, improbably from Britain, who'd been ex-SAS, a Marine or something, and had set this place up and made a fantastic open fire cooked dinner of smoked moose, not mouse, but moose. And many of the hotels were like that. Another one in Sortland has a complete collection of art about Knut Hamsun, who's a Nobel Prize-winning author. I don't know why that guy decided he was going to do it, but he did. When we arrived and I expressed any interest in it, he said, great, and took me off on a personal guided tour of this collection, just as a bus tour was arriving, and his staff were kind of quite obviously going, don't leave us. But what I was left with was this kind of overwhelming enthusiasm of the people there for anyone who showed the least interest in their culture. And for me, that was not hard. We went to a place called Henningvær, and it has, I mean, again, people say, well, okay, you're probably into art. I'm no expert on art, and I was blown away. I had to be just dragged out of these two galleries, one from a guy, Tjera Esplin Jonsson, and look at these pictures. If this isn't the sort of personification of the endless struggle with the sea of every fishing community on earth, I don't know what is. And I mean, I connected with it so quickly. I was asking so many questions. They gave me, a free brochure of it because they were just so chuffed. Somebody from Scotland kind of got their stuff. And equally, I met a guy, Svenung Tongstad, and not only is he here, wearing a kilt, which was a bit unexpected, it turns out he's a heavyweight competitor in Scottish Highland Games. He's actually thrown the hammer against who I think is a cousin of mine in Falkirk at Highland Games. And he's an absolute expert on Celtic history as well as Norwegian, and thinks he's found Celtic standing stones in the background to his own restaurant in Vesterålen, and his life's mission pretty well is to try and understand how those stones got there. So, if you want to go somewhere where it's kind of like here, but, with so much more chance of seeing nature and being in a different environment where people are successfully enthusiastic about what they can do, It's an unbelievably great place to go.
Okay, and we're going to ask one final question, and it's a quick one. Northern Lights.
I'd bring your tripod. I didn't. I'll just say just a couple of other things since I made such a hips of it by not bringing the tripod. One, there are techniques for how to do the best exposures. I am sadly not good enough at all of this, but you can read pretty easily how to change the exposures on manual settings. One of the main things to do is to focus on a candle or something in the car, even the ignition light before you go out, because it gives the camera a guide for what is light in a very dark setting. Another thing is that between the Northern Lights, weirdly, are very predictable apparently. They come out at 8:30 p.m. and they come out at 10:30 p.m. and that's your best chances of seeing them. They're also seeable between the winter equinox and the spring, rather winter solstice and the spring equinox, when they practically stop on the button, and that's your best chances of seeing them. And they are tremendous, but bring your tripod, a rock doesn't work.
Okay, well that sounds really great. I'm looking forward to going to the Lofoten Islands myself next time.